I was never really that interested in multiplayer games. Never got into COD, Halo, Battlefield. I was a Nintendo kid growing up, after all. Aside from the occasional rounds of Smash Bros with the homies, and I did play Splatoon online for a hot second, I was playing exclusively single-player games. I don't really like the idea of a forever game. Not saying it can't be good, just that personally I prefer handcrafted experiences with a beginning, middle, and end. But if there was ever a game to convert me, Elden Ring Nightreign would be it. I'm on record saying that Elden Ring is my favorite game ever, and I stand by it. So a remixed multiplayer version of it is bound to be good, right? Well, I won't lie, I had my reservations about this one. First of all, it feels like the most corporate thing that FromSoft have ever done. And we're talking about a developer who's widely beloved in large part due to their design decisions that go against the grain. And now all of a sudden they're like,
Fortnite.
It's very strange. Additionally, much of Elden Ring's appeal is at odds with the roguelike structure. I was concerned about how much, if any, of the appeal would translate. All that being said, it shares the name of the greatest game ever made, in my opinion, so I was certain that there was at least some enjoyment to be had. And I was already far too curious to pass on this one. After all, I wasn't expecting this game to live up to FromSoft's greatest hits, or to be the greatest thing ever. All I really wanted from Nightreign was for it to be a fun time with friends. So I grabbed a couple homies, booted up my PS5 on release day with as open a mind as possible, and we began our Nightreigning adventure. How'd it go? Well, actually, I first tried my luck playing with randoms, and the experience wasn't great. Let's get one thing straight right off the bat. Nightreign is a game built on randomness, both for better and for worse. From the layouts, to the item and weapon drops, to the passive perks, the enemies and bosses, this is a roguelike through and through. You could be blessed with a highly manageable tree spirit, or get hoed with a deathrite bird. But, more than anything, the temperaments and skill level of your comrades will have the greatest impact on the quality of your time in Limvale. The lack of communication options severely limits the amount of fun you can have with randoms. Your only method of communication is being able to put a pin down for the other players to see, but even then they can straight up ignore you and go do something else. It's almost impossible to strategize since everyone will have different ideas about what is optimal. Confusion equals loss of time, and time is the most valuable resource there is in Nightreign. Decision making is a huge part of the gameplay loop. Sometimes the boss is just too tanky to be worth killing at the moment, and it's better to either save it for later or drop it entirely. But will your teammates have the same idea? Or will they continue to bash their head against a draconic tree sentinel that one-shots them over and over again with nobody there to tell them, hey, cut that shit out? There's also the issue of getting matched with people who just aren't very good at the game, quite frankly. This game requires everyone to be pulling their weight, and just to prove that I'm not being mean for the sake of it, I won't let myself off the hook either. On one of my earlier runs, I got matched with a raider and I died to a boss. Shit happens, you know, but here's where I fucked up. I saw the stone totem and panicked, thinking that it was an enemy attack that would permanently kill me or something, and I crawled off the totem. Turns out that's the raider's ultimate skill, and I just screwed him over as he was trying to help me. They were probably screaming at me through their screen, and rightfully so. Not my finest hour. There's also the classic disconnect mid-session people. Gotta love those. Make no mistake, this game sure as shit is balanced around 3 competent players. Nightreign is a tough game, but unlike other FromSoft titles, some of the difficulty here isn't enjoyable or even intentional. Not every match with randos is miserable. If the stars align and you get a good team, it can be pretty fun, and all the more painful when you just barely don't win. Losing to the Night Lord is so much more demoralizing than your average boss, since now you have to go back to square one. This is part of what I mean about Elden Ring's appeal being at odds with the roguelike structure. I don't know about y'all, but some of my favorite time in Elden Ring was learning the boss movesets. I was perfectly happy spending hours on some of these fights. That's simply not an option in Nightreign. Thankfully, the Night Lords aren't nearly as complex as, say, Melania, but they're still hard enough that you will die to them, and who knows how long it'll be before you get to try again. Nightreign is best enjoyed with friends. That might sound obvious, but if you haven't played it, then you don't know just how much of an impact it will have on your experience. It's to a point where I'd say the game might not be worth playing in the first place if it's not with friends. Maybe it gets better with matchmaking as the game goes on, since players will logically be better at the game the longer they play it, but I can't say for sure. Regardless, being able to talk to your teammates solves a lot of the frustrations of playing with randoms. You need someone to make decisions, even if they're the wrong ones, because having everyone on the same page is just so important. The lack of crossplay is a pretty glaring issue because of this. For Nightreign to be enjoyable, you have to have 2 other willing friends with the same system. That's not everyone's situation, which is unfortunate. It leaves me wondering how many people will be able to properly enjoy this game. So, after struggling with randos online, I enlisted the aid of grizzled Souls veterans Chocolate and Chip. I guess I was supposed to be Cookie, but I didn't get the memo. With the finest warriors by my side, we were finally able to get shit done. Now let's talk about Nightreign's gameplay loop proper. Nightreign has 3 players dropped into a randomized version of Limgrave. The objective is to kill as many enemies and bosses as possible, getting stronger in the process to survive an enemy mob and boss fight at the end of each night. The play area shrinks after enough time has passed, so there's a sense of urgency. After 2 cycles, players will fight one of 8 Night Lords, which are the only new enemies in the game. The combat system is basically the same as in Elden Ring, but with a couple new additions. Firstly, each of the 8 characters has their own unique passive skill, character skill, and ultimate art. I liked the Wilder the most since his passive is downright busted, the claw shot reminds me of Zelda, and the ultimate art is very satisfying to use. Being proficient in both strength and dexterity is also great in terms of being able to use most of the weapons I picked up. The Raider was probably my second favorite. I'm a strength guy at heart, so he's right up my alley. His character skill is just slapping the shit out of someone, with the attack getting stronger if you yourself get smacked during the windup. Very badass. His totem is also multifunctional, dealing damage, granting an attack buff, whilst also being useful for reviving teammates more easily. The Duchess was pretty cool. Her skill allows for things like double riposte or double bleed procs, which is very helpful. Her ultimate is underwhelming at first glance, but can come in clutch under the right circumstances. I didn't care for the Executor too much since his dog form didn't feel too good to control, and because I feel like parrying isn't really that helpful against a lot of the bosses. I like parrying in pretty much every game other than Dark Souls and Elden Ring. Birdman over here I didn't play with at all. I took one look at his pathetic dodge and was like, nah, not today, Michael Keaton. I tried the Iron Eye on a few runs but wasn't super into it since I just prefer melee combat in most games, especially Soulslikes. I didn't even bother unlocking the Revenant since I knew she's a summoner, which is for nerds. Who needs that shit? Not me. I avoided the Recluse for similar reasons. Despite not liking all the characters, I still found enjoyment in experimenting with them. It's one way to keep things fresh across the game's runtime. I also like the dynamic that ultimate arts and character skills add to the combat, despite initially feeling like they're out of place in a FromSoft game. These skills improve the pacing of boss fights, which is great since the Night Lords are quite tanky. It's especially satisfying when a well-timed ultimate leads to a stance break. The combat is very similar to normal Elden Ring, but I found that my approach to enemy encounters had to be fundamentally different. You see, like I said earlier, I love struggling against hard bosses, and in every Elden Ring playthrough I've completed, I make sure not to overpower myself so that the game will still challenge me. There are some instances where I deliberately underpower myself. It's my way of raising the difficulty now that I'm familiar with the boss moveset. This kind of approach will not work in Nightreign. If a boss is too tanky, you just shouldn't bother. It'll most likely be more trouble than it's worth. This game got me to do something I'd never do in Elden Ring. It's saying, this boss is too hard for us right now, let's come back later when we're stronger. Just in case it's not clear, this is not criticism. I like that there were things I had to learn about Nightreign despite my familiarity with the combat and enemy movesets. In Elden Ring, I want to win with as little extra help as possible. I have fun with just my weapons, talismans, Estus, and Wondrous Physic. Nightreign, on the other hand, is most enjoyable when you're using every resource available to you, which includes consumable items. This is another thing I had to get used to. In Elden Ring, I almost never use items aside from the occasional rune art. They're either completely worthless or too valuable to ever use. Nightreign's items are actually good though. I'm more comfortable using items knowing that everything resets with every run, and they've filtered out most of the useless junk, leaving you with just the good stuff like extra attack, defense, greases, and extra runes. Because the penalty for a failed run is so severe, we had to play to win. Teamwork is essential in Nightreign. Voice chat is a must. This way you can coordinate, strategize, and exchange information. You need to plan things out so as to make the most out of your time before night falls. The The bosses don't play around in this game. Levels, weapons, flask upgrades, talismans, and the new dormant powers are all important factors in how players will perform against the boss. I actually really liked the Night Storm as a risk-reward mechanic. If you stand in the storm, your health will slowly drain. However, it's not so fast that you absolutely can't do anything. If there's a church just out of reach, or a boss with a pixel of health left, it's very possible to clutch it out. This system created many of the most hype moments of my playthrough. There are a few things more satisfying in this game than when a super risky gambit pays off. The time limit also means that doing things that would usually be boring suddenly become more interesting. When you're fighting regular enemy mobs, raiding a cathedral, fortnite, or ruin, the clock's always ticking, so you have to be quick about it. In Elden Ring, you want to stop and smell the roses, take in the gorgeous view, take your time exploring, but not here. You want to complete the task in front of you in as little time as possible, and you've already got to be thinking about the next thing. The time limit also makes traversal more interesting. Characters now have a super sprint, performed by pressing L3, as well as a Sekiro-esque wall jump. There's also no fall damage, which I'm super thankful for. Just running from point A to point B will have me thinking about the most efficient way to travel. The Wilder's hookshot can also be used for faster movement, which is very cool. The time management system is what gives Nightreign its identity, and it's probably my favorite thing about the game. It's either that or the design of some of the Night Lords. Shifting Earth is a mechanic introduced after killing your first Night Lord. Basically, a portion of the map will become a different biome. There are 4 Shifting Earth events, including Mount Gelmir, Mountaintops of the Giants, Rotted Woods, and totally not Nightreign. It gets activated by random chance, but you can rest in the round table hold to turn it off. I really like this idea in theory, but I think the execution was a mixed bag. The Mount Gelmir event is one that we weren't able to figure out until after killing the final boss. Once we tried it for realsies, it ended up being one of the more helpful Shifting Earths, as it upgrades an armament of the player's choosing to legendary status. Plus, there's plenty of runes to obtain from all the enemies. It is pretty lame that the boss is just a magma worm, which are very common in this game. It would have been cool if it was Rykard waiting down here to fuck you up, but honestly just about anyone would have been better. The lack of remembrance bosses in this game is a problem that we'll get into more later on. The Gelmir event also spawns bosses next to lava pools, which is lame. The Falling Star Beast is one of my favorite mini-bosses from the original game, but he sucks when you have to fight him this way, which is really unfortunate. He's one of the few field bosses that I wouldn't have minded refighting. The Mountaintops event I do not understand the point of. You hike for ages up this huge-ass mountain through tons of annoying enemies and dragons only to finally be rewarded with extra frost resistance. This does not seem even remotely worth it. I don't get it. It sucks because I appreciate the idea of having some more visual variety and new mechanics as the game goes on, but if it's not worth it extrinsically, then I'm not going to bother. The Rotted Woods area is pretty sick. It's not that hard to figure out even on your first attempt, and you'll be surrounded by field bosses which have high rune yields. Also good for getting rot weapons, which are great against the tanky Night Lords. The totally not Nightreign event is probably my favorite. It's essentially a giant maze with Estelle waiting for you at the end. Really cool boss, and it's worth doing since you'll receive a free revive if you defeat him, and you'll come back stronger. Shifting Earths are cool, but they're also pretty much the only map variety you're going to get in Nightreign. But even these have the same layouts every time, so it's not exactly going to feel fresh for very long. I don't understand why From didn't include base maps other than Limgrave. Altus Plateau gets used for the final Night Lord hunt. This should have been happening throughout the game, not just at the very end. Elden Ring has so many other areas that are, quite frankly, much more visually interesting than Limgrave. I want to run around in Cerulean Coast or the ancient ruins of Rao. Give me something other than the first area. And unfortunately, this isn't the only thing that gets overused in Nightreign. Nightreign struggles with both encounter variety and quality in the Night End bosses. I'm frankly very surprised that this is an issue, since Elden Ring is a massive game filled to the brim with interesting things to fight, but in Nightreign we're still running into the same old tree sentinels, deathrite birds, and tree spirits well into the mid and late game. These can appear as field bosses and end of night bosses, just so we're clear, and some of these were overused in base Elden Ring already. It does get slightly better the more you play, as more bosses get added to the pool the further into the list of Night Lords you go into, but this really should not have been an issue. Remembrance bosses were severely underutilized, for instance. The only ones we ran into were Morgott and Estelle, and yes, it was Morgott specifically. Despite this character having 2 different movesets, we only got to see the Lane Dell version of his moveset. But beyond that, where are the rest of the Remembrance bosses? I want to fight Bale, Dancing Lion, Moog. Hell, I would have been fine with Radahn returning yet again. He's already designed around the use of summons, so why not? Another area FromSoft could have pulled more from is bosses from previous games. As we knew from the trailer, it's possible to get bosses from the Dark Souls series as end-of-night bosses. I think this should have happened more often and with a larger variety of encounters. It was really cool to fight the Smelter Demon without having to do an atrocious runback. We needed more of this kind of thing. These are certainly some of the better things to fight at the end of a day. However, I still have to question some of these choices. Centipede Demon was a fine enough boss, but his original incarnation straight up sucks. I wonder why he was chosen instead of, say, Bartorius. And I don't even think the most ardent Dark Souls 2 defenders are clamoring to fight the Duke's dear Freya again. I would have much preferred someone like Dark Lurker or Sir Alone. I accepted long before this game came out that this would be a different kind of FromSoft game. If we were talking about a new IP with brand new assets, then yeah, everything should be original. I don't want to see Artorias or Ludwig in the Duskbloods, for instance. However, Nightreign is built upon reusing and remixing existing content. So why not reuse the best you've got? I wish they committed more to making this game a FromSoft Greatest Hits album. It would have the same problem as Greatest Hits albums in music, that removing songs from their original context would yield diminishing returns, but again, we're reusing shit anyways. I say just go crazy with it. And if we're going with the music analogy, the inclusion of Royal Revenants and Deathrite Birds is the equivalent of buying a Beatles Greatest Hits album and finding Revolution 9 and Wild Honey Pie amongst the track list. I don't understand why FromSoft stopped at Morgott and Estelle. We could have had a wealth of more interesting fights from both Elden Ring and the Souls series. Anything would have been better than Deathrite Bird Round 20 or Wormface with a side of crab. Does anyone actually enjoy this fight? If so, please let me know why. To clarify my position a bit, I'm a lot more forgiving of these kinds of encounters appearing as field bosses before the end of the day for two reasons. First, it's the player's choice on whether to engage with it or not, whereas the night boss is forced upon you. Secondly, the time limit adds a dynamic to the combat that's not present in the night bosses. Your goal is not only to beat the boss, but to do it as fast as possible so that you'll have time to do other things after it. This context drastically improves my perception of these fights. When I see a tree spirit in the field, I'm thinking, here's a boss whose moveset I know inside and out, let's take it out as fast as possible since he's on the way to where we're going anyways. When a tree spirit appears as the end of night boss, I'm thinking, really? This guy again? Are you fucking kidding me? It's for these reasons that the end of day bosses are my least favorite part of the game. It's possible to get an interesting fight, but it felt much more like the exception than the rule. It baffles me because FromSoft had so many different sources to pull from. Not only did they use hardly any Remembrance bosses, but they also had the freedom to incorporate any boss from the Dark Souls series, and in spite of that, we still got far too many repeat encounters. The night boss, more often than not, was boring, and it really shouldn't have been. On the topic of repetition, I'd like to point out a weird quirk in the procedurally generated maps. In one session, we got the exact same map 3 times in a row. Adding insult to injury, it just so happened to be the most cursed seed of all time, featuring a Revenant as the Night 1 boss and an Ancient Dragon for Night 2. Augur also made an appearance on all 3 runs, as he too was invited to the worst bosses of all time party. The perks and weapons were different, but it was still ass. We had the same layout, same shifting earth, and the same trash bosses. The whole point of a roguelike is that it's different every time, right? This has never happened in any of the roguelikes I've ever played, so I'm again very confused as to why it's happening here. There's no way this is intentional, right? I can only hope that this is a bug that will eventually be patched out. The Night Lords are the major bosses in Nightreign. Day 3 consists solely of a boss fight against whatever Night Lord your team is hunting. There's only 8 of them, so why not? Here's a quick tier list. Gladius is the first Night Lord in the game. Weirdly, you can tackle the others in any order you please after killing him, aside from the final boss, but Gladius must be killed first. I don't really like this decision, since he's not even the easiest Night Lord. His ability to split into 3 different dogs is rather cumbersome to deal with. I think the idea was to have 1 dog for each player, but it rarely if ever works out that way. I almost always felt like I ended up fighting more than 1 dog at once. Aggro management is very difficult given how much the dogs move around. It's also the weakest Night Lord aesthetically. It just looks like 3 red wolves stuck together, especially apparent when it splits. It's not horrible since the moveset when they're together is just fine, but it doesn't give the best first impression for the Night Lords to come. C tier. Adele is up next. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. Maybe it's Adele, but I'm gonna call it Adele because that's way funnier. Anyways, Adele should have been the first Night Lord if you ask me. Not only because the fight is much easier than Gladius, but it's also much better. The attacks are punishing, but exceptionally well telegraphed and easy to get the hang of even on a first attempt. The visual design is delightfully disgusting, and the gravity magic looks great. This is the kind of boss design that I like to see in FromSoft games. Fighting Adele made me a lot more optimistic about the remaining Night Lords. A tier. Noster is a weird one. I like this boss overall, but it's got some issues. The poison mist not only gives me flashbacks to Valiant Gargoyles, but it creates situations where you can get hit by it even if you recognize it and run away. There's gotta be a better way to telegraph these kinds of attacks. There was a game that did this kind of thing well, but I can't remember the full name. It starts with a D and ends with a 3. Anyways, the moth is really hard to hit with most weapons, so I found it best to always attack the scorpion. Although with this strategy you run the risk of being pelted with magic that you can't see. There's not a great solution honestly, at least none that I could find. The phase 2 is much better, but still not perfect. The charge attack where he spams a bunch of magic goes on for too long in my opinion. Still, the boss is visually very impressive, and you do eventually get a lot of opportunities to punish. It's hectic, challenging, but a little too annoying for A tier. I'll give him B tier. Maris is where we start getting into the what the hell were they thinking territory. You know how a lot of people complained about how Elden Beast likes to run away a lot, or how Dragon Lord Pasidrusax flies away and it takes a bit before you can hit him again? Well, Maris poses the question, what if running away was the boss fight? No, really, I think the vast majority of this fight is spent chasing after him. We came into this fight with 3 Wilders and it took an eternity. It wasn't even hard, we got it first try. It was just long and not very satisfying. It can shoot these jellyfish looking things, it splashes around, it summons these bad touch hands, and it puts you to sleep. Oh, the status ailment in the game too. I don't have a single positive thing to say about this one, other than that the fight is visually interesting, but it's so boring that pretty visuals aren't enough to save it. F tier. Libra is the 5th Night Lord. Before you begin the fight, you can make a deal with him. Each dialogue option will grant players a benefit and a drawback, like reduced max health in exchange for healing when your HP is low. I opted to fight him without making a deal, but it's still an interesting mechanic. As for the fight itself, it feels like the most traditional FromSoft fight we've seen so far. He's a vaguely humanoid creature with a variety of magic and melee attacks, including massive AoEs. He's also got an attack where he shields himself, and the players must destroy all of the seals in order to prevent him from buffing himself. It looks great, it's fast-paced, the attacks are fairly telegraphed, and he's got a couple mechanics unique to him. It's a hectic, chaotic fight that doesn't feel unfair, making him one of my favorites in the game. S tier. Flugelhorn is my favorite Night Lord in the game. The fight starts out simple enough, with the Centaur hopping around and performing some well-telegraphed melee strikes with shockwaves. He'll pepper the arena with holy spears as well. Phase 2 is where the fight really shines though. In a Udex Gundyr moment, he regrows his missing arm and gets access to more melee combos. Unlike Gundyr and the corrupted clusterfucks of Dark Souls 3 though, the dodge timings were easy for me to get the hang of. It's an exceptionally well animated fight. I was able to intuitively figure out a lot of these attacks having never seen them before. Also, the visuals in this fight are stunning. The design of the creature, the arena, and the attacks all look fabulous. This guy can honestly go toe to toe with some of normal Elden Ring's Remembrance bosses. It's that good. S tier. Oh, Caligo, I wanted to like this fight so badly. The visuals are nothing short of breathtaking, even when compared to some of the other Night Lords. FromSoft bosses almost always look great, sure, but this one is something special. But actually fighting this guy has all the same problems as Maris. You'll be fighting him and then all of a sudden he just straight up dips and you're like, where did he go? Well, there he is, all the way on the other side of the fucking arena. He does this constantly. Even when you do catch up to him, hitting his tiny head can be harder than you think. This is another boring fight in which it feels like you chase the boss more than you actually fight him. The spectacle is marvelous. In terms of visuals, he's a 10 out of 10, absolute cinema. But Caligo commits an unpardonable sin. He made me play as a ranged build. D tier. The final boss of Nightreign is this guy. I'm not even going to try to say that. It starts out as an Artorias type beat, as the one-armed swordsman lays down some rather standard melee combos, but that puny health bar isn't fooling anyone. This is a two-phase fight, and it's where shit really goes down. This one has all the best parts of Flugelhorn, with perhaps an even greater cinematic spectacle to go with him. What's most impressive about this fight, however, is how he feels balanced for 3 players despite being the most archetypical FromSoft swordsman out of all the Night Lords. He now has magic AoEs to complement his melee combos, and is able to drop nuclear bombs that cover nearly the whole arena. Even if he isn't aggroed to you, you've still got to be locked in. The ground explosions also do a good job of keeping players on their toes. It's challenging and flashy enough to feel like a final boss without being so hard that players won't be able to feasibly beat him on their first run. This fight is among the best in the game. I think I prefer Flugelhorn ever so slightly, but this guy is a close second for my favorite fight in the game, S tier. Although the Night Lords are variable in quality, they skew positive. I was concerned about how FromSoft would adapt their boss design philosophy to fit the roguelike structure, but I think they mostly succeeded. The Night Lords all feel balanced around 3 players, are challenging yet readable, and tanky enough for all the upgrades obtained throughout players' runs to feel worth something. The visual design is also excellent in almost every case. I don't like all of them, but the good ones were my favorite part of the game. This section of the video will be dedicated to going through a few loose points that I couldn't find a good place to talk about elsewhere. Let's call it a nitpick lightning round. Here we go. Getting stuck on the overhang of a cliff after using a spirit spring is annoying. There was also an instance in which I spirit jumped into a giant hand ambush that I couldn't have possibly known was there, resulting in a cheap death. Lame. I tried this game solo a couple times, but stopped because I just didn't find it all that fun. They've since made some changes to how solo expeditions work, so maybe it's good now, but I kinda doubt it. The way you get up to the Flame Chariot's weak points is pretty jank. It looks wrong, it feels weird, but I also found it strangely satisfying. Not really a problem, just an observation. Bosses can leave the circle at the end of day fights. Even if this is intentional, I disagree. It would have been fine if the storm damaged the boss too, but no, it only applies to the player. Feels unfair. Field bosses are allowed to participate in the Everjails. This should not be allowed to happen in my opinion. It's super annoying and can result in cheap deaths. Keep in mind that cheap deaths in this game are worse than in your average Soulslike, since they can potentially spoil an otherwise amazing run. At the time of this recording, 2 of the Night Lords have gotten the Everdark Sovereign treatment. Basically, you'll fight the normal Phase 2 as the Phase 1, and then the boss gets a completely different Phase 2 that has new moves and is much more challenging than the original. They're a cool addition, it's like a super hard endgame challenge, but honestly I'd rather FromSoft take measures to improve the issues with repetition in the end of day bosses, as that's a more glaring issue in this game. However, I'm at least glad that the game is getting some kind of post-launch support. I guess I should say something about the character quests. They exist. I only fully completed the Wilder's Remembrance and it was fine. You get some nifty relics for your trouble, along with a costume that looks exactly the same as the normal skin. I don't get it. These quests can impact the ending too, which is cool I suppose, but I really did not care about the story. Maybe the loreheads will get more out of this than me. After the Night 2 boss, it's possible to venture out and kill extra enemies and bosses for more runes, and I can't tell if this is intentional or not. I lean towards thinking it is, since they haven't patched it out yet, but the game can behave rather strangely in this state. We had an instance where my friend was fighting a boss that was only visible on his end of the game. I could see him inflicting damage on a bugged out health bar, but I couldn't see the boss. It just looked like he was fighting his inner demons. Very weird. And on that note, Nightreign is a weird game, so it's fitting that my feelings about it are also weird and borderline contradictory. In many ways, it feels antithetical to its namesake, and FromSoft's past design philosophy for that matter. It has a lot of strange decisions, is probably not enough fresh content for the price, and it made me fight way more Deathrite birds and tree spirits than I bargained for. It's also a game that I had a lot of fun with. I can't stress enough, you really need friends for this one. If I had played this game entirely with online matchmaking, my opinion of this game would probably be a lot more negative. But if I was to judge the game purely on the experience I had with my friends, then I had a great time. We actually did a couple of these sessions IRL with 3 monitors and 3 PS5s hooked up. It was crazy, but these were some of the best times I had with the game. I had fun stealing my friends' talisman pickups, leading them to boss fights that we were woefully underprepared for, and occasionally having moments of being helpful and heroic. I like the strategic aspect of it that's only possible with voice communication. I like the circle as a timed risk-reward mechanic. The characters were fun to experiment with, and while the Night Lords are a mixed bag overall, there's more good than bad, and I found that the good ones were genuinely outstanding. I'm glad I got to experience this game the way I did. I'm also a little more optimistic about the Duskbloods releasing next year. I'm curious to see how FromSoft will handle a multiplayer-oriented title with all new assets. Now all I have to do is convince all my friends to buy a Switch too so they can play with me. Overall, I'd say Nightreign met my expectations. It's very far from perfect, but I think I'll remember my time with it fondly. Did I mention that I fucking hate Deathrite birds? Like, oh my god.
Fortnite.